This is my rotary 4-post alignment lift. I purchased it earlier this year and I've gone through and restored it. I'm going to put a link in the description that goes to my restore video. What this video is for is I'm going to go over how they work, what to look for when purchasing them, help you avoid some of the mistakes that I made, and give you an idea of the best way to take them apart and how to assemble them in your garage. So let's get started. Now this lift is controlled via this hydraulic pump, and it's got to pump fluid through this hose. Some of them use hydraulic fluid. This one actually uses automatic transmission fluid, but it's going to go through this hose all the way into that ramp where there's a big hydraulic cylinder, and you'll see that shortly. So let's get this up. And as I lift it in the air, you're going to hear a clank. Those are the safety latches. So I've got it up in the air. It's kind of noisy, but those are safety latches, and the purpose of those are so if something were to happen, this wouldn't come crashing down. Those latches expand out there, and they go into these square holes, and you can see where it kind of rubs in this grease as it goes up, and it's just a big triangular piece of steel that's spring-loaded and snaps in there. There's also a secondary latch, and that's what this little pulley is. This is a guide, a cable guide, and it's got two springs that are kind of pulling against the cable. If a cable were to break, and this were to fall, this cable guide would come in, and as this comes in, it would also kick another triangular piece of steel outward. So you'd have kind of two things working with you. You'd have the airlock that's going up, and you'd have this special safety cable lock if a cable breaks. So I've got this up in the air. It's not sitting on the locks right now. I can kind of wiggle it around some. The cables are what are supporting it. So I want to let that back down so it actually sits on these locks. So that thing that's sticking out is going to come down until it hits the next ledge, and then it's going to be even more secure. Right now, everything is still being held up by the hydraulic cylinder, which we'll see shortly. So I'm going to slowly lower this. And if you look at every single corner, you want to watch them as it lowers. They all locked where they should be. So now it's even more solid. All of the tension is off these cables now. I can kind of move them around. There's the piston under there is not really being utilized right now. It can stay like this forever. It's not going to settle anymore because it's on those safety locks. So it's very secure. This is how you want it anytime that you work on a car. So let's crawl under here and take a look at this piston. And on this lift, there's only one big hydraulic piston, and it's under this ramp. The other side is completely empty. There's no air lines or pistons or anything on that other ramp. There's nothing in it. And the other ramp can actually be moved. This lift is adjustable. You can make the distance between the ramps a little narrower or a little wider by adjusting that other ramp. So here's the piston, and this piston extends out here, and there's a big 1-inch thick steel plate that all of the cables mount to. Let's get a better view of it. So as the lift goes up, this hydraulic piston actually moves in. And when it's all the way up, it's that big thick 1-inch steel plate is going to be right at the end of the cylinder. So there's 4 cables that come off here. 2 of them are gonna go right around these sheaves, these pulley things, they're called sheaves. And 2 of them are gonna bend to these posts. So one of them's gonna go to this post, the other one's gonna go over there to that post. And it runs right through this cross section. The rear posts are also gonna come off going this way, and they're gonna round those pulleys, and then they're gonna come right back out, and this is one of them right here, and it's just gonna go through this plate. It's not attached to the plate, it's just hovering in the center. And then those 2 cables are gonna go way down to that end. And if we look down here, we've got 2 sheaves on this side, and those cables, one of them just loops through a sheave and goes through this section up to the top of that post, and the other that comes down this side goes through that sheave, comes up here, and goes up to this post. And inside here is another pulley / sheave that the cable goes through. So that's how they go up and down. Is that piston going out and in. Again, nothing on that side. And we have 3 lines that are coming in here. So that small line is for the safety locks. And all of that loud noise as it was going up that I was talking about, that it's setting on right now, those are spring-loaded, they're out right now. And to get those back in, you have to operate the safety locks, which are done by air. So I'm going to hook this up. Set my phone down. So I've got this hooked up. It's just a temporary solution right now. And when I push this button, it's going to operate the safety locks. But right now, I've got the entire lift. All of that weight is on those locks, so it's not going to be able to pull them in. So I need to go up with it a little to take the weight off of those latches. And now I can press this button to do the safety locks. And here's one right here. Watch what happens when I press it. It sucks that right in. So now you can see that that isn't sticking out. I'm going to let go of the button. See how it's in and out? So now with me holding this button in, I can lower this lift and it'll start to go back down. And you want to keep an eye on every corner when you're lowering it. You see the ramp starting to drag. You want to keep an eye on every corner when you're lowering it, because if you didn't have it up quite enough to pull in all the safety latches, one of them may want to stick, and you'd have three posts where it's trying to lower and one of them where it's not going down at all, and that wouldn't be good. So that's what that little line does that runs through there. And all that little line does is there's a T right here, and one side of the T comes out, then there's another T here. It goes to this safety air latch thing, and then it goes over to that one. And then that other end of the T does the exact same thing at the other end. It runs all the way down, it tees, it goes to the airlock over there and the airlock over on that corner. And then this thicker air line, I don't have it hooked up over here. It's just kind of coiled around here, but eventually I will. That runs all the way down and it loops over to the other side of this ramp, and it comes out in different spots. And this allows me to get airline to these center air jacks. These pumps right here, they operate off air. It's a little compressor in there, and it pumps hydraulic fluid into the piston there, and that'll make those go up and down. So that's pretty much how to operate a 4-post lift. It's kind of simple when you look at it. It's easy to see underneath this one because it's all cleaned up. So now I'm going to go over the information I wish I had before I bought this, and it's what to look for, how to inspect it if you're thinking of purchasing one of these for your shops. And I paid $2,000 for this lift with the center air jacks and the Hunter alignment machine, and it it looks like a really good deal right now, but I also have about $1,500 more into it, cleaning it up and painting it, and I don't even want to count the time that I have into this. Pretty much everything that can be wrong with a lift, this one had going for it. So hopefully this video will help you avoid some of those mistakes. But these do come up for sale quite often. There's a ton of them out there. There's different brands. There's Challenger, Rotary, Hunter. They probably all are similar as to how they work. And I opted for a used commercial lift because I wanted one that was more heavy duty. I know you can buy 4-post storage lifts fairly cheap, and the difference that you'll see on a lot of them is just the thickness. Like the height here is pretty thick. Some of the cheaper ones you see for like a hobby garage are half the thickness. I wanted something that was more heavy duty for my garage and was meant to work on a car versus kind of store a car. So that's why I opted for this used Rotary. Some of the things that can go wrong with them or that you want to look out for are how flat are these ramps. So if they had heavy vehicles on them or they were used a long time, they could want to sag a little in the center. And you can kind of see it. Mine's got a little bit of a sag here. So that's one thing that you probably should avoid. I didn't know any better. It works for me. You can do some things to help with it. But you can take a string when you go to look at it, and you can put one right here, and then have your buddy walk down on the other side and hold it tight, and just see what that string does. Does it want to hit in the center and nowhere else? If it has a sag like that, I would probably avoid it. It means that it may have been overloaded at one point. But if you did buy it, you can make it work. So if those ramps have a slight bow, generally what that means is this piece right here is also flared up a little. And when that flares up and you bolt the center cross section to it, it makes this cross section want to twist to go with that. And when that twists, where it goes into this 4-post, that also has a slight twist. And then that sheath and that cable coming up is kind of fighting against the side of the pulley versus being able to run straight up. So I ran into that problem, and you can see what I did is I put a 16th piece of aluminum, 1/16 thick, on this side, and that way it's hitting right here, and then this side is faced up, and it allows this cross section to twist back to where it should be, and it makes everything perfectly perpendicular. It makes this gap nice. Without that 16th piece of steel in there, if I tighten that down tightly, this ends up with a bigger gap here. So you want to make sure that the gap you see here is uniform, that the cross things going into the post are nice and perpendicular to the ground. You don't want to see a twist there. You don't want to see a sag under any of the ramps. And if you see that, I would probably walk away. But I didn't know any better, so it isn't the end of the world, but just keep that in mind. The other thing is rust, and that should be pretty obvious. These can get pretty rusty, and if you think you're just gonna come home and wire wheel it and paint it, it ends up being a lot more work than you realize. Usually the worst sections are under these rear turn plates, and if I lift this up, you can see there's little balls in there and some plastic things that help these move around, and these are on stainless plates. A lot of shops will end up putting the stainless plate here because otherwise those are just rubbing on mild steel and they can wear into it, and you've also got, depending on where you live, you can have snow and salt coming off, and it can want to seep under that stainless plate, or people won't clean under the turntables I would definitely take the turntables off. You can lift them right up and carefully set them out of the way and inspect under there, especially if it's got rust in other areas. That's going to be the worst spot. And when I brought this home and I took it apart, there was some rust under there, and I was scraping it away and tapping it with a hammer, and then I actually poked right through the steel. It was so thin in one spot. So that's bad. I ended up having to completely cut out and weld in a new plate there. So it is fixable, but something I would also recommend avoiding if your lift is that bad. And now this other stuff I'm going to go over is kind of the more common stuff, stuff that can be fixed and replaced. It's just going to cost money, so you want to keep this in mind when you're inspecting it and making your offer. The first thing that I would do, especially if you can do it ahead of time, is get the model number of the lift and what it's weighted for, just so you have that. Usually the sellers will post a picture of that, but sometimes they don't, and you can ask for it ahead of time. That way you know the length, you know if it'll work in your shop or not, and you won't be wasting the seller's time or your time going to look at it if it's too long or it's not rated for what you think it is. And then before you even go to look at it, once you have that model number, you can find the documentation for it online and a parts diagram. I actually couldn't find this, but Rotary sent it to me. And then you'll have the complete manual of all the parts. And the parts that I'm going to go over now are kind of the wear parts and what you should do before you go and look at it and you know what parts can wear. You should look up what those parts cost, because if you have to replace them, you want to know, okay, this cable looks bad, it's going to be $150. This sheave looks bad, that's another $150, because it will start to add up. So I just mentioned the cables, and that's probably the most common thing that wears on these. And they do get greased and oiled, but if you rub it, you don't want to see like strands sticking off or cuts. If you can get enough slack in the cable, or look especially where it wants to bend, that's where it's likely to split. And each one of these tables is around $130 plus shipping. And 3 of mine were good, and 1 of them was bad. And I could see there was a difference. This is a replacement cable that I bought, and you can see up here it's completely round. And if I look at these other cables, these have this square thing on the bottom, so it's a slightly different cable than the rest of them. So you can look for stuff like that to see if maybe they replaced or one or the other. But you want to inspect them, make sure there's not frays coming out, and just keep in mind it could be around $130 a cable if they're all bad. The next thing is the sheaves, and those are those pulleys. So if you lift the lift up and then you put it down on the air jacks, and you keep holding the line to help it go lower, and you get the slack in the cable, you can come and you can put your finger on these pulleys and just push them in and out. Make sure that they don't wobble. I had one that the center of the pulley was really worn. The hole in the center ended up being about almost half an inch bigger in diameter than it should have been. That pulley would walk around, and it still operated, and you wouldn't really know it unless you did the test that I just showed you. The next thing you want to look at are the safety latches that I showed you, and those will wear as they go up on this bar, and mine all needed to be replaced, and they were about almost 3/4 of an inch shorter than they should have been, just from going up and down for 30 years. And it was around $200 for all 4 of them. So I had $200 in the safety latches, I had $130 for a new cable, and I had $150 for a new wheel. So you can see how it adds up. And then the final thing is the hydraulic piston. So this piston on the end of that cylinder that comes in here, at the very end is a big round disc that's inside this cylinder, and it's got a seal on it. And as that piston comes in, the fluid is coming in here, and it's pushing that back and back and back and back and back all the way to the end. And then when it comes out, it goes the other way. So there's really two spots where these cylinders can leak. Well, technically three. One right here, but that's no big deal. But there's got to be a seal at the end. So if you have fluid dripping down here, your cylinder is going to need a rebuild. You also want to look to make sure there's no weld splatter or any scoring or anything on the actual piston part. And then on the other end, right there, that silver thing is actually a breather vent. And what that does is it allows air to escape when the cylinder compresses that air in here. And if you have fluid coming out of here, it's bad. It means not the breather is bad, but the piston is bad and it needs a rebuild. What it means is that the end of that piston rod, that big seal that I was talking about that comes down and down and down and down, it means fluid that's on this side of the seal is leaking past it. And then as the piston comes through here, it's compressing that air and that fluid, and you'll actually have fluid start to come out here with the air. So if this is dripping, it's bad. On mine, there's actually squirting fluid out, which was really bad. So you can look on the ground underneath it. You can see if it's wet. You can put the lift in the air all the way up to force fluid out there if it's in there. But definitely check the ground, because even when mine was bad, if I put it all the way up in the air, it would squirt the fluid out. Then if I put it down and then I put it all the way up in the air, it wouldn't have allowed enough time for that fluid to work its way past that seal. But if I came out the following day and did it, I'd have more fluid coming at it. So see if it's wet, see if it's damp, see if there's a puddle on the ground. And it was $100 for that new seal kit, and then it was $220 to have a local place rebuild it for me. So stuff starts to add up. You also want to consider if you ever got to try to park anything underneath it. So you can put the lift all the way up and measure to see what kind of room you have. I'll probably never come in this store and park something under it going the length of the lift, but I may come in that door and park something under it going this way. And I think I could fit 2 cars under it that way for winter storage if I wanted to. So keep that in mind. Measure the height of one of your vehicles before you go to look at it. And then if you've got a lowered car, you want to consider how steep the ramps are. But this is kind of minor because you can always modify the ramps. They do make longer ones that are aluminum. I opted for adding these wood pieces that I made just to extend them out. These are steel ramps, so I could have welded on steel, but then they'd be extremely heavy and they'd really hang down more than they already do. So consider the ramps to help getting on. And then if it does have center air jacks, those are going to stick up. So if you bring like a level and you set it on here and you let it overhang, and you can measure the height difference. And on mine it's 2.5 inches. So you can measure the clearance under your lowest car before you go and take that into consideration. And these pads are removable, so I can take those off. But you could always shimmy them down to one side of the lift if you wanted to, if you've got a spot under your car that it hits, or they can be removed, but it's almost a two-person job to get those out of the way. So if the center air jacks won't work, just keep that in mind. You could always resell them and maybe buy something that's even more low profile. And after you've made that offer and you're going to pick up your lift, definitely bring a friend that's a lot heavier than you realize. And you want to have an idea of how it actually comes apart. A lot of the instructions that you find in the guide only talk about putting it together, not taking it apart. So I've got a good idea of the best way to do it now that I know how these work. But when I went to get it, it was a hell of a time. We ended up putting pieces still tied together with cables ran, folded in half onto the trailer, and it was just it was just a mess. It did not come apart as easy as we thought, but it was really just we didn't know what we were doing. So when you go to take it apart, I would bring some blocks of wood, and the reason for that is you want to lower the entire lift on those blocks of wood so that the lift is like maybe 8 to 10 inches off the ground. And the reason for that is we're going to take the post off first, and when you take the post off first, you need to be able to pull this away. And you've got these studs that come out, so you need this off the ground a little so that you can lift the post up, and then you can pull it back. So I would bring some maybe 4x4 posts and just put 2 on top of each other, so you've got 8 inches, put 1 under each side, and lower the lift all the way down. From there you can take off the hydraulic cylinder and disconnect everything from right here. After you do that, you can take off these ramps, obviously. You can lift off the center air jacks to get those out of the way. And then you can undo the cables at the top here. And then these cables will come down, and you'll be able to take these posts and take the nuts off there, and you'll be able to lift them, and then you'll be able to slide them back away from right here. You may have to twist and finagle them a little bit because you can see that there's a guide there, like a rub guide that sticks in there. So they may have to twist a little when they come off, but you'll be able to get rid of every single post. And then you've just got the main lift area sitting on those blocks of wood that you brought. After that, you want to take these cables out. So you'll undo these springs, and if you look here, if you take this bolt out, that's what holds this pin in, and you'll be able to pull that pin out or hammer it out here, and you'll take this cover off, and you'll be able to pull that sheave out of the way. And you'll do that on every single corner. And then once you do that, you'll be able to undo these center pieces, because this will be up in the air. It'll be supported right here by the block of wood. So it'll be 2 bolts there. And when you undo those bolts, you'll be able to carefully pull these end pieces away. And as you pull these end pieces away, these cables are gonna pull in to there, and you'll be stuck, or you'll end up with just the long ramps with the cables coming out of each end, and then you have to manhandle those to get them on a trailer, or a forklift would be even better. But that's the secret, is just bring some blocks of wood, lower the lift onto the blocks of wood, and then do the ramps, air jacks, post, end pieces, and then these long ramps. And then when it comes time to assembly, is kind of the exact reverse, but you have to pay more attention because you need to make sure that everything is aligned right. But you'll start off kind of the same way with the blocks of wood under each side of these long ramps so that it's up in the air. And then you'll get your cables ran through your end pieces, and they'll just be dangling off to the side. And you want to square this. So what I did is I measured from this bolt hole all the way over to the one on the other side. And they're just under these stops. So you get your diagonal measurement, and then do the same for the other. And you'll want to adjust them so you get the same measurement, and you want to make sure that one side is exactly where you want it. So I use that line in my cement to position this ramp, and then I measured diagonally, and I just adjusted this one forward or backward until I got the same measurement at a diagonal. Then after I did that, I did the post. And if you look at the instructions for this rotary lift, they say you should have a 1/4 inch gap between the end of this and this plate here, this latch plate with all the holes in it. You should have a 1/4 inch gap. But then they also say that there's alignment pins, and if you look here, down in the center, there's a threaded spot. So you can put some threaded rod in there and it'll stick up. And then underneath here, if you can see it, is a hole. And it says that you should put that threaded rod in that hole and then adjust your post. But if you do that, you end up with like a 1/2 inch gap between the end of this and that latch plate that they talk about, and not a 1/4 inch. So I kind of split the difference. I didn't use those alignment pins. I just took a piece of wood and made it a 1/4 inch thick, or a little bit more than a 1/4 inch to split the difference between a 1/4 and a 1/2. And I put that wood against these latch plates, and I slid the post onto it. And then I made sure that this was perfectly centered of that post, and that's where I marked my holes to drill. And when you go to mount it, do the 2 posts on the side of the hydraulic pump first, and you can bolt those in, and then do these second. But you're actually able to put those in place and mark it and not drill the holes for the cement first, and you can actually lift the lift in the air. I talked to the rotary guy on the phone. He said it's perfectly fine to lift these if you have no vehicle on them, if they're not bolted to the floor. He said just don't put it all the way up at the top, but it's perfectly fine to go up a few feet. So I did this side first with the right spacing, with everything anchored, and then this side, I got them where I thought they should be, and I tried it first and it seemed fine, and that's where I put them. And you'll obviously want to plumb them both ways, make sure that every post is perfectly level. You can use some stainless washers for shims. And I had tried marking the holes because I didn't want to scratch up the feet with a drill bit by drilling through. So I tried marking the holes and then moving this out of the way and then drilling it. But the bit kind of wants to wander. So after it not working well, I just said screw it, and I put the drill bit right in the holes and drilled it. It did scuff up the paint a little, but you can put a little grease in there for the ink around the top of the anchor if you don't want it to rust. So that's pretty much the trick to getting these positioned right. But then once you have everything in place, you've got adjustments to make. So to start, I put the cables in and I lifted the lift. And I could tell as it was lifting, one side was a little higher than the other. It was pretty obvious. So what you'll do is I hooked up the airline bypassing this lock button just so I didn't have to hold those safety locks in. I hooked it directly to this so that the locks were always sucked in. And then I used the level on both ends and kind of in the center to adjust it so that as it goes up on the cables, it's level. And that's just done by tightening or loosening these. So then you've got it level via the cables. The next part is adjusting those latch bars. So I lifted it all the way up, and if it doesn't go all the way up, if it stops early, you probably don't have enough fluid in it. So you can lower it and you can add some more fluid and repeat. But get it to where it's all the way up to the top where you want it. And then if you look in here, there's an adjustment nut right here, and there's threads that come up, and that can make this latch bar go up or down. So you want to get the lift as high as it'll go, and you want to slide this latch bar up as high as it'll go, and then you want to undo the airline so that this latch thing snaps back out. And you want to get that latch thing in the very top hole. And when it's in there, you'll be able to reach underneath and you'll be able to still move this thing up or down, and it's just got to be clinking against here. And you want to shove it all the way up so that it's at the bottom of that latch bar. So it's right on the top. So when the lift is as high as it will go, it's hitting the bottom here. And then you'll tighten this nut on the top so that it's holding that latch bar as high as it'll go. And then you want to come down to the bottom with a ruler, and you'll measure from the bottom of this plate up to the bottom of this latch bar. And then you'll take that measurement and you want to adjust that nut so you lower the latch bar. On the rotary guide they said 2 inches, but I did 1.25 inches. And I did that so that when I have this on the lock, it'll allow the lift to be 3/4 of an inch higher when it's all the way up at the top. So you'll go around and you'll do that for all of them, and then you'll test it. You'll put the lift all the way up, and then you'll lower it, and it should settle for about 1 inch or so until it hits that latch bar. So you're just adjusting it so they're all kind of hitting at the same time, and you can hear it when you lift it. All of those safety locks on all 4 posts are kind of snapping at the same time for me. So that's how to adjust it. You can get a little bit more fancy with it. You can put kind of a post where all the tires would be, and you can use a transit, and then you can come back and you can fine tune these nuts so that when it's on the latch bar, that every spot on the ramp is the same height. So I may do that again, but the procedure I just showed you gets you right in the same ballpark, and they're all kind of snapping at the same time. So hopefully this has been educational. I'm just going through my purchasing experience. I wish I knew all of this before I bought it, because if I did, I probably wouldn't have bought this lift. But all in all, I'm glad I have it now. I'm glad it's done. I'm glad I can use it. And it'll probably be a good addition for my garage. And when it comes time to buy a 2-post for out here, I'm probably going to buy the nicest one that I can find. Thanks for watching.